Welcome to part 10 of the Starlight Tavern, one of my books available on Kindle. My birthday and starting school. I awoke the morning of my birthday and came into the kitchen to find everyone there, and they called out, "Surprise!" Even Aunt Mary was there, and in the middle of the kitchen table was a beautiful cake with chocolate icing and candles, and there was a stack of presents for me. Mr. John lit the candles, and I blew out all of them at once as they sang "Happy Birthday" to me. Then I began to unwrap the presents to find a new doll, some red tennis shoes, a pair of new pajamas, and a book of Bible stories from Miss Hattie, Uncle John, and Harvey. After breakfast, I shared the birthday cake with our guests in the dining room, and then just before lunchtime, I rode down in the car with Mr. Harvey and Aunt Mary to Sequoia to the Five and Dime, where Aunt Mary treated me to a hamburger and a malt at the lunch counter. Then we shopped for school supplies, and I got to pick out a new notebook, pencils, crayons, and even a book bag for school that was made of canvas. And then at the grocery, she let me buy some store-bought cookies and Cracker Jacks. And when we returned home, I opened the Cracker Jacks to find a prize inside. It was a tiny little horse. And there was a birthday card and letter to me waiting from Miss Martha. I opened the letter to read the card and found a $5 bill just for me. The first day of school, my Aunt Mary woke me for a change. She dressed me in a silly little plaid pinafore and blouse with white ruffled socks and black patent leather shoes. She braided my unruly hair and saw to it that I had brushed my teeth and washed my face before handing me the brand new book bag that I'd picked out at the Five and Dime. And that's when I saw that Miss Hattie had embroidered my name across the front of it. I rushed into the kitchen to see Miss Hattie and hugged her, thanking her for what she had done with the book bag. Then I looked inside the pack to see that all my new supplies were inside. I sat down to breakfast, and when we were done, Miss Hattie handed me a paper sack lunch. She had written my name across the front of it, and inside the bag was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, and a piece of my chocolate cake. Hattie hugged my neck, and as Aunt Mary took me by the hand and walked me out the door, across the lawn, past the hotel and the post office and the store, to the little one-room schoolhouse on the other side of the church. It was nothing like my old school. My old school had been a large brick building with lots of classrooms for every grade. There had been a cafeteria where we would eat lunch, hall bathrooms, and a gymnasium where we would play inside if it was raining. But this school had only one big room with a bath and coat room at the back of the building and a small sink and counter. We walked into the schoolyard past several children and up the steps through the double doors. To the left of the doors sat the teacher's desk, and behind that on the wall hung a big blackboard and a clock and a flag. Out front of this were 3 rows of desks for the students. Several boys and girls were already seated there. They stared at me as I walked up to the teacher. My Aunt Mary introduced me to him, and he bent down to shake my hand. He was very tall and lanky. Mr. Timmons said he was glad that I was there and that I could go and pick my seat. Meanwhile, the other students who had been out of doors came inside, so that I had to make a beeline for one of those desks. I chose one near 2 girls that looked like sisters and took a seat with my book bag and lunch bag in tow. Soon my aunt waved goodbye to me and said she'd be back for me later. She went out the door and disappeared. A boy dressed in a plaid sweater sat down across from me in the middle row. He looked at me and smiled. His dark hair stuck up all over his head, and I noticed his two front teeth were missing. My teeth had finally grown back, so I didn't have to spit anymore when I talked, and I could whistle again. He said his name was Lenny Payne and asked me what my name was, and I told him. He laughed and tried to say my name, but he spit a couple of times in the process. And then he said, "I'll just call you Magpie." I told him to stop calling me a magpie and tried to ignore him, but it was hard to ignore him because he kept asking me questions. Then Mr. Timmons called the class to order. He asked us to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and then he wrote his name on the big blackboard in bold letters with chalk and asked us all to come up to the front and introduce ourselves to the rest of the people and say what grade we would be entering. We began with the front row. An older girl stood up and told us her name was Mary Beth Hill, saying that she was a sixth grader. Then the girl in front of me stood up and said her name was Kathy Jones and that she was in the fourth grade. Kathy was very pretty. She had long blonde hair and looked like a real-life dress-up doll. Then it was my turn. I told them my name was Maggie Wilkes and that I was in the third grade. The two girls behind me did turn out to be sisters. Betty Jean and Cindy Lee were in the third grade also. They smiled at me as I returned to my seat. A boy walked up, a skinny, tall boy named Roger Batts, who looked like a farmer. He wore overalls and a thin white shirt, and his boots were covered in dirt. Then Lenny Payne stood up to announce that he was a second grader, and this continued until all of us in the room had made our introductions. Our teacher, Mr. Timmons, was a small, tall, skinny man with thick glasses, baggy pants, and suspenders. His hair was almost jet black, and his skin was dark, but not like Miss Hattie's, and later I would learn that he was a Cherokee Indian. He had come to the mountain for the job as teacher at the school from Tennessee, he said, and I soon learned that he could make us laugh and not even try. His voice was so high and whiny when he talked, and his glasses kept sliding down his nose, and had it not been for those suspenders, his pants would have slid down to his knees too. But he could tell interesting stories, and he made learning fun. We began that first day with the alphabet. For those of us who did not know it, Mr. Timmons wrote the letters on the blackboard below his name and had us to open our notebooks and copy them onto paper, telling us that we would be graded on our neatness. I got an A. I was a very good writer. Then, after a time, we moved on to the vowels and the consonants and wrote out several words like cat and dog and rat and bat. And then Mr. Timmons asked if we thought the alphabet was the only one in the world. Some of us said no, but some said yes, as he began to write some other symbols below that alphabet on the blackboard. When he was done, he said that those symbols were the Cherokee alphabet and that it had been invented by a very smart man by the name of John Guest, but that his Cherokee name was Sequoia. He told us the town at the foot of the mountain was named for Sequoia, and he said that Sequoia had been proud to be a Cherokee himself, and that he was proud to say Sequoia was his very own great uncle. He went on to tell us that Sequoia had made beautiful jewelry and that some amazing trees further west in our great country were named for him as well. Mr. Timmons had us write out the new alphabet and spell those same words we had spelled in English with those. This was also the beginning of our first history lesson with him as well. We learned that Sequoia had been the son of a Cherokee mother and a British father, and that he had been born with a deformed foot so that he could not run and play. He listened as a child to all the stories his elders told and thought it would be nice to write them down. So over time, he invented that alphabet in Cherokee. And he started the first newspaper in the area and also copied the Holy Bible into that language as well with the help of a priest at a mission school in Willstown, and that he was also very talented. Mr. Timmons said we would be tested on Sequoia that Friday, and then the bell rang for lunch as we took turns washing our hands at the little sink in the back of the room. There was also a water fountain there, the bathroom and a counter where we stored our sack lunches, and there were racks on the wall for hanging up our coats in wintertime. When my hands were clean, I took my sack lunch outdoors. I sat on the steps with Lenny Payne, Betty, and Cindy. Other children sat at a picnic table underneath some trees nearby, or they sat on the walkway. Mr. Timmons sat in the door of the school on a chair to eat his lunch, watching us all as Lenny looked over at me. "Magpie, can you come to my birthday party?" he asked. And I said I guessed I could. "My mama knows your Aunt Mary, so I know you can," he informed me with a big toothless smile. He invited Betty and Cindy to come as well, and Mr. Timmons asked when his party would be. And Lenny proudly announced that the party would be at the big hotel on Saturday at 2 p.m. There'll be cake and ice cream and balloons. I told him it sounded like fun. "How old will you be?" Mr. Timmons asked, as Lenny smiled a big toothless grin and announced, "I'll be 7. Birthday party at the hotel. On Friday after school let out, Aunt Mary and Mr. Harvey took me down to Sequoia again to the Five and Dime once more. She let me pick out a present for Lenny from the toys they had on their shelves. I chose a pack of soldiers and an army truck for them to ride in. We bought wrapping paper and ribbons and returned to the tavern. Aunt Mary said this occasion called for a party dress. When we got home, she fumbled around in my closet until she found just the right one for me to wear. On Saturday after breakfast, she had me take a bath before I did my housekeeping duties. Then, after lunch, she dressed me for the party. She curled my hair and tied a big blue bow in it, and I put on the blue plaid dress with white tights and blue shoes, and then Aunt Mary helped me to wrap the presents for Lenny. Then we walked across to the big hotel.